What's up, everyone? Welcome to the live stream. Missed everyone last week, so my apologies if you were all waiting and keen for another live stream. But here we go, back again. Got a couple of responses. We got a lot of submissions actually from you guys, so thank you for submitting your work for review. Just a reminder that we obviously can't get through everything. I can't go through entire essays in these sessions, so just send through a short paragraph, a few sentences, and that will mean it is more likely that I actually review your responses. But I love that everyone is sending in so many questions, so many practice paragraphs and parts of their essays, because obviously everyone wants to improve, everyone wants to maximize their results. You want to get feedback in terms of how you can optimize your preparation for your exams, how to deal with different types of questions. That's what I want to break down for you, and that is what I'm going to be going through today. So got a couple of examples that I'll get into. I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to join, those who are intending to watch this live stream. If you are here, please do say hello. I can see Saxon in the comments. Bit of fire to get us started. Love to see it. Saxon, maybe one of your responses is even up for review, if I'm not mistaken. So it might be the first one up, if that is you already here. So great to see you. And yeah, we've only got one person at the moment, but we'll allow some others to trickle in. Last couple of weeks of school, so assessment heavy period right now. I'm sure a lot of you have probably just had an English assessment, or maybe you have one this week or next week. If you have any questions about your assessments, put them in the chat. If you have a specific essay question, or you want to know how to prepare or approach something for English or otherwise, could be a different subject, put your question in the comments and happy to address those. So anything to do with your current assessments, maybe you've got some results back from your assessment this term. Maybe you've got something coming up. Maybe you've just started a new unit. Maybe you just had an assessment and now you're moving on to, say, Module A, Module B, or a different unit of study. Let me know what you're up to, though. It's always good to see what everyone is doing. Like to keep my finger on the pulse. Otherwise, I'm going to get into it in a second. So we will start reviewing the first response here, which is on the Tempest and Hagseed. So about to get into the Tempest and Hagseed. I'll share my screen in a second. I'm just going to break down an introduction to an essay question on the Tempest and Hagseed for textual conversations. So here we go. Let's do this. Put myself in the right position. Hopefully that's not getting in the way. All good. Here we go. Live stream brought to you by JeddAI. Remember, if you need any instant feedback on your essays, creative pieces, whatever it might be, go to JeddAI, go to Jeddle.com and go to the JeddAI page, and you can subscribe there. That will also give you access to our team of real life expert markers who know exactly how to get full marks in every section of the exam. So if you want to get direct feedback from the pros, make sure you sign up to JeddAI and you can submit those responses there, in addition to getting instant feedback based on teacher-trained AI models, things that are actually relevant to you, not just the generic GPTs, the kind of feedback that actually is going to be based on the criteria of your exams and that teachers have looked at. So JeddAI is where you want to go for your essay marking, for your feedback in preparation for your assessments. And of course, we'll continue doing these live streams to help you out as well. So we've got a question here on the Tempest and Hagseed, and this is for Module A, Textual Conversations for the HSC in New South Wales. If you're watching this from Victoria, watching this from a different year group, different country maybe, no problem. What I'm going to be doing here is showing you how to improve and refine your writing, and you can apply this to any essay, really. So, question is, the nature of conversations between texts is a perpetual one of interpretation and reinterpretation as meanings evolve and transform with each encounter. So this question is a statement question. There's a statement that's been provided, there's a claim that's being made, and then you get the actual question, which is, how is this statement true of your paired texts? And in this case, the paired texts are The Tempest and Hagseed. So you've got Shakespeare and Atwood having a conversation with one another. Primarily, Atwood is kind of having a conversation with Shakespeare because Shakespeare came first. Now, let's break down the terms of this question, and then we'll have a look at a student's introduction or introductory response to this question. So the question is, the nature of conversations between texts, i.e. textual conversations, is a perpetual one. What does perpetual mean? Continual. It never stops. It never ends. So it's a never-ending one, and it consistently involves people making interpretations and reinterpretations. So that means that the meaning is going to continually change and transform as different texts respond to each other. So in this case, because Hagseed is an adaptation of The Tempest and it puts its own contemporary spin on it, and Atwood actually experiments with it, and she makes it more postmodern, and she changes the messaging a little bit to suit her contemporary context. That means that she is reinterpreting things. She's interpreting Shakespeare, reinterpreting it, putting her own twist on it, so as to commemorate Shakespeare's play 400 years after its publication, but also to innovate, to make something original in Hagseed. So that reinterpretation element of Hagseed means that The Tempest and its meaning is preserved to an extent, but then that meaning is also transformed because it's applied to a contemporary and dissonant context. There are different values in the 2000s versus the 1600s. So that's the key there. The key word here is that meaning transforms, meaning changes. Okay, so you've got meaning evolving and transforming. It's a tricky one to kind of isolate words because evolve, transform, these are very similar. You've got to be careful not to ever say these two words together. You just pick the most appropriate one there. You never want to bundle key terms together. You actually only want to separate them and relate them together. Sometimes you just use them interchangeably. So textual conversations, it's a perpetual one of interpretation and reinterpretation. There's another set there. So you're going to have to use interpretation or reinterpretation selectively, like where that's most appropriate. Obviously, we're thinking about Hagseed as a reinterpretation, if you will, of The Tempest, but it's also an interpretation. There's almost interpretation and reinterpretation, but let's think about it like this. Hagseed interprets the Tempest. So Margaret Atwood in Hagseed has made an interpretation, and she's actually innovated with the meaning. So this is Atwood to Shakespeare. And then the reinterpretation is us, the reader or responder, because we are now looking at Atwood's interpretation of Shakespeare applied to a contemporary context, and now we're reinterpreting Shakespeare. The reader reinterprets Shakespeare, The Tempest, that is, by being exposed to Atwood's interpretation. And not just the interpretation, her kind of innovative / experimental / postmodern interpretation. It's a different lens that she's approaching it through of The Tempest. And I think if you can get to that, if you can understand that breakdown of interpretation versus reinterpretation, the reinterpretation being by us, the original interpretation being by Atwood, just to simplify things, then that's how you can divide those terms throughout your essay. It's really important to look at a question like this, and when you see words that are pretty similar, to think about how you can distinguish them. So just then I kind of talked through it and I said, okay, when I use interpretation, I'm going to think of Margaret Atwood's interpretation of Shakespeare and that she's innovated with it and interpreted it through a specific contextual lens. A contextual lens that is different to Shakespeare's because we live in a different time and she has her own agenda. And then the reader who has read The Tempest is now reinterpreting The Tempest because we're exposed to the interpretation in Hagseed. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. That's how we can apply these terms differently. It's really important that you understand that. So I'll actually divide these up and give this a different color because it is important to use them differently. Evolve and transform, you can probably find a way to separate those, and you should. So you might again, you just decide how you want to treat evolve differently to transform. It is worth thinking about that for a second. So whenever we use meaning evolve in, how do we want to think about that? Is that to do with the interpretation? Is that to do with the reinterpretation? I would align the evolve more with the original interpretation. So it evolves to meet kind of Atwood's contemporary context. And then the transformation is our understanding of the Tempest. So notice what I'm doing here. I'm pairing these words here with the other ones now. So this is how you should be thinking about questions. You've got to break down those key words. And originally you might think, oh, hey, evolve and transform are kind of the same. I'll use them interchangeably, which is true. But it's better than just using them interchangeably to actually have a specific purpose for each word. And it can just be something quite broad here. So whenever we talk about interpretation, and that is Atwood's interpretation of Shakespeare's work in Hagseed, then we are going to use evolve, that the meaning of it has evolved to meet that contemporary context with that interpretation. But the meaning transforms in the reader's mind as we reinterpret the Tempest through the lens of Hagseed. And I know that's probably starting to sound quite complex. It is kind of complex, but if you rewatch this through, slow it down, take some notes, hopefully that does make sense. I've color-coded things here to show the matchup. If I'm talking about reinterpretation in my essay, I'm going to talk about transform. If I talk about Atwood's interpretation of the Tempest in Hagseed, as it's represented in Hagseed, I'm going to talk about evolve. You can decide. That's kind of random. It just makes sense to me, but that's the way you can deal with a lot of key terms in a question. That's a lesson in itself of breaking down a question. You have to split up these terms. I'm just trying to separate out the words I've added in here. Anything not in bold is based on what I've added compared to the original question. There we go. But just going through that, and in terms of the encounter, obviously the encounter is first of all Atwood encountering the Tempest, and then us encountering the Tempest, and us encountering Hagseed. So encounter is a nice word. It's not really like a key word, but it's a good one to kind of use occasionally whenever we're talking about the reader's experience with both of these texts. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense. Got a question back here from Millie. So just going to quickly think about the question from Millie. How would you talk about meta theater, and will this live be posted? Yeah, the live will be posted. As I said, you probably want to watch through some of these breakdowns because they're quite technical, but there are some really important principles in terms of how to break down a question and think about them. So I would advise watching them back. We're trying to clip all of this up as well, post some shorter, important clips for you to look at later. But how would you talk about meta theater? We'll get into that in a second when we look at the introduction. And hello to you, Nala, as well. Great to see you again. Let's go back to our response here. And we've seen the question now. We understand. We're really talking about this interpretation, reinterpretation, meaning changing. Great, we get it. There's a lot of experimentation going on by Atwood. She's creating a new text, even though it's preserving parts of the old text. And that's the key thing with the Tempest and Hagseed. There's this preservation element, and then there's an innovation element. Okay, so just to put a note down, with this one, there's a preservation element plus an innovation element, right? And that's what's new. That's what's adapted. That's the new meaning. That's the evolution of meaning. And the preservation element is to commemorate, okay? That's so that we know that Shakespeare still has relevance today. The message in there is still relevant, but the context to which those ideas are represented or are relevant has evolved, right? The context has evolved. It's important to understand that. So they're the two components to be aware of whenever you're dealing with any essay question on the Tempest and Hagseed. Any essay question, you must discuss the balance between what's being preserved, and that will result in resonances, and then what has been changed due to a new context, a new agenda by Atwood. Okay, and why? You always need to say why. and link any differences to contextual change, okay? Module A is the most context-heavy module, okay? You need to constantly link your analysis to specific contextual influences that are responsible for the differences in the representations between the two texts. Especially the differences, right? You also need to draw analogies and similarities. You need to find those similarities, but you're kind of slightly more focusing on the differences, I believe, when you're talking about context, okay? So you could say that there are ideas that are similar. The idea of imprisonment, of feeling imprisoned, the idea of desiring freedom, wanting to express yourself, the idea of always wanting to be in control and then having to let go of control to truly be free and coexist with others. Those are universal concepts, but they're applied to different contexts. So universal concepts, ideas, resonant ideas, but they're being applied to different contexts. So that's why we get different representations of those ideas. Okay, so that's kind of the key. Anything else to note? The other thing I would note is frame your Module A essays. Now, this applies to most of the combinations, but definitely for Tempest and Hagseed, from the perspective of the ladder text or the adapted text. So in this case, it's from Atwood's perspective and how she has dealt with Shakespeare. Because obviously, Shakespeare wasn't around to kind of correct Atwood's interpretation and respond back. It's one author creating a text and then someone 400 years later coming up with their own version, but adapting it and making important changes to suit their context. And not just to suit their context, but to actually transform the story and transform how we view the text. You can read Atwood's Hagseed and then look back at the Tempest and take something completely different away from it. It's not just about understanding the contextual differences. It's about actually transforming your understanding of the original text, okay? Module A isn't just about understanding contextual differences. A basic essay will do that. A really good Band 5 essay for Module A will be able to explain the differences in relation to the contextual shifts. So in Shakespeare's time, the primary values were X, Y, and Z, patriarchal society, Jacobean era. There was the age of discovery, colonization was rampant. We're discussing those power dynamics between master and slave within that context of colonization. A million other things. Shakespeare's last solo authored play. All of those contextual influences are important. And a really good Band 5 essay will be able to say, here's the changes that Atwood's made, and here's why. But the Band 6 essays, the best essays, will be talking about how the actual meaning of the Tempest changes and how that's the value of the textual conversation, that a new interpretation is facilitated by Atwood's adaptation. Okay, so Module A isn't just about understanding contextual differences. It's about transforming your understanding of each text, especially the original, i.e., or e.g., no, i.e., the Tempest in this case, right? So you're actually going to look at the Tempest differently and be like, oh, that's really about imprisonment, isn't it? Because now I've seen the literal prison setting in Hagseed. I didn't really pick up on all the imprisonment ideas, but now I'm fully in tune with that. And now you start taking different things away from it. So it amplifies certain things, okay? So if you read Hagseed, Hagseed amplifies certain aspects of the Tempest and minimizes or trivializes others. So Atwood has a lot of power through her intertextual innovation because she's literally recreating the story of the Tempest within Hagseed directly, right? Through her intertextual innovation and dialogue, she's actually changing what we're focusing on Sorry, let me just get my spelling right. She's changing what we focus on in the Tempest. Okay, so you no longer look at the same thing. Maybe it focuses on imprisonment as a concept, and we start to understand it from a more psychological viewpoint than we originally did, because maybe we didn't think about it psychologically, but because we see how in his head Felix is, who's the modern day Prospero, that makes us rethink the struggle that Prospero was going through, right? So psychoanalytic perspective or lens. That's the kind of thing, right? So it starts to reshape our understanding, places emphasis on things that weren't previously obvious to us, because now we're looking at a new text that's put in heightened emphasis on certain parts of that original text, while also changing the kind of context in which the story is playing out to appeal to a modern audience. So there's those two key things, right? You're going to better understand the context, but you're also going to transform your understanding of the actual narrative. So narratives are going to change. You're going to deepen your understanding about that storyline. Okay, so this is the band 6 differentiation. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Just seeing what's going on in the comments. We'll come back to some of those questions, but we're going to carry on here. Let's have a look at this student's response to the question. A meta text, well, let's go back up to here. So the question was this, and we've already broken it down. Now it says a meta text engages with significant ideas by demonstrating how universal concerns transcend time and context. The issue with this is that I can't really see any of the key terms in the question. So I don't know if you've submitted this introduction as a generic response, or you've actually submitted it with this question in mind. I guess I'll know when I read the rest of it. I can see you've used evolving here, and I'm just going to get the highlighted version because that always helps everyone. Okay, so I'll get rid of this. Actually, we'll leave that. Might help you. Okay, so you've used evolve here, evolve in, but your first sentence, your thesis sentence, is going to immediately put the marker off because you haven't engaged with the key words about, textual conversation being a perpetual one of interpretation, reinterpretation. You're not meant to repeat the question. If you're going to repeat the question, you may as well just get rid of that sentence and start with your second sentence. But if you can offer some deeper exploration of the concept of a textual conversation and expand on the idea of interpretation and reinterpretation, and how one author's interpretation of an original text can actually influence the responder's reinterpretation of that same text by presenting a dissonant contextual perspective. Okay, well, now you've added in a lot of parts there. You're probably thinking, oh, wait, can you write that down and show me what that looks like? Sure, I'll try and retrace that. So if you were talking about the interpretation part, remember, it's one author's through a composer's interpretation now of an original text. Okay, you're telling us who is the interpreter. This is where you define how you're going to work with the words of the question and you can make it general, so it applies to any textual conversation, and then in the second sentence you can bring in Atwood and Shakespeare, as you've done. So it's fine to have this high level first sentence, but it has to engage directly with the words of the question, and it has to break them down to say something specific and meaningful, not just repeat the key words, or in your case, just say something generic that didn't engage with it. And this is full of generic and vague language. Significant ideas. What significant ideas? Universal concerns. That's literally the exact same thing. And you've literally repeated the universal part by saying transcend time and context. If something is universal, it does transcend time and context. So it's not saying much, right? To be honest. And I want to help you out by being blunt. I would not include something like that because you haven't said anything specific and you've actually repeated the same thing kind of 3 times. or in all three, everything I just put in bold, boom, 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 all the same thing, not actually saying anything. So through a composer's interpretation, now I always like to add in an adjective before a keyword. So if I can say the type of interpretation, well, I know one: innovative, experimental. Only one. You only need one that kind of captures the essence of the Tempest and Hagseed conversation. Don't mention the Tempest and Hagseed. You're extrapolating. You're going beyond the text for this first sentence, but you're still thinking about Atwood and Shakespeare, even though you're not going to mention them. You're still basing the idea off them, even though you're not mentioning them. Okay, so make sure you understand that. Just because you're not mentioning the text doesn't mean you have to say something so generic that isn't linked to the text ideas and the nature of their conversation. Okay, that's the trick. You do still draw upon them. So what I'm going to do in blue here, well, I'm not going to do blue because I've already used that. Colors, running out of colors. I'll do purple. Purple for Jeddle. Through a composer's innovative interpretation. Now notice here, I've used the word of the question interpretation, but I have to drop in an adjective to expand on it. It's so important. If you can do that, you're going to elevate to band 6. Through a composer's innovative interpretation of an original text. Notice that we have defined what the interpretation is of and whose interpretation. It's a composer's. Okay, that might seem obvious, but it's not, because we're saying it's the composer who makes an interpretation and it's the reader or responder who makes the reinterpretation. Okay, through that's how you capture the cycle, the perpetual cycle there. Through a composer's innovative interpretation of an original text. Everything in purple I'm adding in. It was not already in the question, and that's what you really need to understand to create a very good thesis statement or opening sentence. Through a composer's innovative interpretation of an original text, right? And then we were going to say about the reinterpretation, right? Responders are compelled to reinterpret that text through a dissonant, I'm engaging here with the words of the rubric, a dissonant contextual lens. Okay, reinterpret. Who's reinterpreting? Responders. Who was interpreting? Composer. See how I separated? Because I thought initially about how I can separate these words so I'm not just kind of chucking one in whenever it suits. There's actually a deliberate use for interpret, and there's a deliberate use for reinterpret because I chose to define it that way. Rewatch that again and again how I broke that down, because that is what the top students are doing. Most students there would just say, oh, occasionally I'll use interpret and occasionally I'll use reinterpret, and I'll just show that it's this cycle. But if you can actually distinguish between those things, then you're going to be way ahead. Okay, so again, responders are compelled to reinterpret. I'm showing the relationship between the interpretation and the reinterpretation. The question does not do that. And we're saying that it's going to reinterpret that text through a dissonant contextual lens. The question didn't say anything about that. It just said meaning evolves, transforms. So everything in purple here is fresh, but I'm working with that interpret, reinterpret. Okay. Now I need to say the effect of that. Okay. So what? A composer has an innovative interpretation. Responders are compelled to reinterpret that text through a dissonant contextual lens. I need to now say the so what? What's the consequence? What's the significance of that? Okay. And that's where we can bring in the transformation of meaning, right? So transforming their understanding, or let's see what spin we can add on this. Through a composer's innovative interpretation, responders are compelled to reinterpret that text through a dissonant thereby immersing themselves in a perpetually transformative, this is again a bit wordy, thereby immersing themselves in a perpetual and thus ever evolving. Oh, this is going to be good, guys. Not to toot my own horn here, but this is improv here. Ever evolving process of intertextual transformation. And intertextual is another word from the module description. Yeah, that's pretty good. This is the first time I looked at this one. I just pulled these up just before, I promise. So it might not even be that good, to be honest, but at least it's doing the so what. So through a composer's innovative interpretation, responders are compelled to reinterpret that, thereby immersing themselves in a perpetual and thus ever-evolving process of intertextual transformation. Why I like it, why I am kind of gloating here a little bit, which I shouldn't be, is because it's somehow got all of the key words and I've split it up into a sentence structure that kind of relates the interpretation and reinterpretation and then moves on to the so what, the importance of it. Because your thesis statement needs to tackle the importance, the significance of a textual conversation, but you need to do so while also incorporating the other keywords of the question. There's a little trick here, perpetual and thus ever evolving. I mean, honestly, that's kind of repetitive, but that's okay. We're just going to put that in for perpetual. Encounter of intertextual encounter. I mean, yeah, okay, we didn't say encounter. That was probably less important though. And you're not meant to get like 6 keywords in every sentence, by the way. That's just a bonus if you could do that. But I would rather have 2 keywords that are expanded on with a lot of detail and nuance than have 5 keywords that are essentially getting close to looking like the original question. So less keywords is fine, but make sure you're expanding on them. Okay, so what am I doing with this? There we go. So there's an example of a really good thesis statement, first sentence. And if you compare it to the one in red here, and again, not just doing this for the sake of it, I'm trying to help here. So the first one didn't engage with any keywords of the question, whereas this one has actually taken all the keywords and expanded on them and differentiated. But it required that initial breakdown process to actually think through. This is what most students do not do because they're too stressed on the day of the exam. Think through what each of those words could mean for your essay. You can still use the bulk of what you've prepared. It's just about rewording, rephrasing things. And you need to put the most emphasis on the first sentence and your introduction as a whole. Every sentence there really has to be refined to suit the question. And that means you need to have an essay draft that is much shorter to write than the allocated time. So if it's a 40-minute essay time, most students struggle with Module A for this. Get it down to like 32, 33 minutes, and you can have a quick brainstorm at the start of the exam and think about how you can nail this section, even if the rest of the essay kind of looks the same as what you prepared, other than the topic sentences, which also need to be heavily adapted. If you nail the introduction and the topic sentences, and you make these kind of adaptations, you'll fly through the rest of it. You'll find that you can reuse a lot of the material you've prepared if it follows a really robust structure. Okay. Question. Let's go back to a question. Is this only engaging with dissonances? No, you should engage with timeless or universal aspects as well, right? Resonances, because there's a resonant narrative within it. But this is just the first sentence. We're just talking about the dissonances in the context there to get that in, because we're saying, why would someone reinterpret something? The reinterpret invited the dissonant aspect because it's a different context. But when we get to why you would even do that interpretation, right, then you can have resonant. And if you want me to show you how you could add it into the same sentence, it'll be a bit overkill. I would bring in resonant somewhere else in the introduction. Remember, you do not need to do everything in the first sentence. Let me show you how you do that. Okay, so through a composer's innovative interpretation of an original text. Now, I'm thinking, well, the original text must have a resonant narrative, a resonant human experience, to use that term, right? We'll avoid that because it's the common mod language. But we've got like a resonant human struggle, let's say, or a resonant human journey or something like that. So if you really wanted to get that in this sentence, although again, I think it would be overkill, you don't have to get every module term in every sentence, right? So I used dissonance because it was most appropriate to this reinterpret part. But we will definitely engage with resonances throughout. You don't have to get all of these in. The priority is always the words of the question. Module terms, bring in wherever you can, but don't force them in unless they're actually an explicit term of the question. So that's the rule of thumb. They're a bonus, but they're not essential all the time. You don't have to balance them out in the same sentence. Some things will be dissonant, Some things will be resonant. Use those terms where appropriate, but don't force them in unless they're a keyword of the question. But anyway, if you did want to say that through a composer's innovative interpretation, you could say of an original or of a resonant text, or an original text with a resonant human narrative. I mean, again, this is just like vague language, but if you wanted to get it in, there you go. You could get resonant in there. We don't need to force resonant into this sentence because it's not a key term of the question. It's in the module, they're fine. But again, use it elsewhere. Don't jam it in for the sake of it. All right, does that make sense? So that's an example of a thesis that really breaks down this question, has the key words in there. And yeah, I mean, if you wanted to talk about meaning, responders are compelled to reinterpret the meaning of that text. There we go, we could do it even better. The meaning of that text. Okay, cool. Let's see if there's any other questions. Makes sense. Okay, thank you, Saxon. I can't remember if this was your response or someone else's, but thank you for submitting it. As I said, the first sentence was one that I was going to be quite harsh on. It gets better. It's just that one because it's the first sentence. That's what makes the impression on the marker. So if there's one thing you guys take away from this, it's don't just put something general and vague as your first sentence, like you're warming up. Often this first sentence for people in the introductions is the warm-up sentence, which is crazy because it's actually the most important sentence in a way. It's the first sentence the marker reads. And if you've used it as a chance to warm up and kind of just repeat the question or say something generic that doesn't link directly to the question, you have wasted the number one opportunity to impress the marker. You're better off if you feel like you're not going to nail that top sentence, just start in with the next sentence and start getting the keywords in. You will do better that way than creating the wrong impression that, oh, hey, you're just going to write some vague conceptual argument here that doesn't link to the question, okay? So keep that in mind. It's not to say, it's all useless. It's just saying you're actually better off to not have something if you can't think of how to break it down on a conceptual level like this before bringing in the texts. For the second sentence, we've got, in this vein, Margaret Atwood's Hagseed. Always good to have the form in there. Like, is it a prose fiction novel? Hagseed reinterprets these enduring themes. What do you mean these? You haven't mentioned any enduring themes. That's the crazy thing about it. Hopefully you're understanding. Your first sentence was here. You never said any enduring themes. You just said there are enduring themes. You said there are significant ideas. You said there are universal concerns. Now you're saying these as if you've told me some. You haven't told me any. Okay, so be very careful here. Specificity, being specific, is what gets you the top marks, not having lots of these generic terms. So try and go through your essays, if you're watching this, go through and just highlight wherever you've used these generic words, ideas, themes, concerns. Let's get rid of them all. And you either say something specific, provide a theme, don't say the word theme, say an actual theme without saying the word theme, if you know what I mean. Like reinterprets the enduring struggle to relinquish control. Okay, that's an idea, but you never said the word idea, okay? That's what's really important. So that you'll be a lot more sophisticated if you can do that. If you wanted to say enduring, again, it wouldn't make sense to say these. You haven't mentioned anything before, but you could say the enduring struggle to relinquish control over, let's keep it simple. The enduring struggle to relinquish control. Sure, that's where you could have also said resonant. Because if something's enduring or it's universal, it means it resonates across time. So to my point before, we didn't need to jam it into the top one because bang, there it is, straight into the second one. Okay, now again, you have to say, it doesn't make sense to say Margaret Atwood reinterprets it unless you have used the tempest in the same kind of part of the sentence. Because what's she reinterpreting? This is where you got to be careful with how you present it, because again, I'm reading reinterprets, and then it only will make sense when I get to the end of the sentence. Okay, so Margaret Atwood's prose fiction novel Hagseed reinterprets Shakespeare's. I think you got to say it here. Like, just be really clear, right? Shakespeare's. What are we saying? Play The Tempest. And again, you can call it what you will, as it's called like a late romance. Technically, it has tragic comedic elements, but it's not like everyone dies at the end. It's not a tragedy. It has comedic parts. So yeah, it's kind of a late romance is often the genre attributed to it. Late romance. So Shakespeare's late romance, The Tempest, to she reinterprets the resonant struggle to relinquish control in Shakespeare's, the enduring resonant struggle to relinquish control in represented in, or yeah, in Shakespeare's The Tempest. Okay, how does she do that? How does she do that? Reflecting the involved. You've said she does it, but you haven't said how. So that's why you might want to say through up here. Give me something like through what? By reshaping, or in this vein, by reframing. This is where you got to kind of play around with the sentence. Let me not overcomplicate it, because you would have to then change other things if I did that sentence structure. Margaret Atwood's that reinterprets the enduring, or interprets. I think she interprets it the way we're using it. Remember, it's Atwood does the interpretation, we do the reinterpretation. That's that's just how we're choosing to do it, so it creates a consistency in that word choice. Margaret, in this way, Margaret Atwood's that interprets the enduring struggle to relinquish control through for a postmodern audience, right? Or for a late 21st century audience, for a late. Why am I saying late? I mean, we're not there yet, are we? Early 2016. For her 21st century, what should I say? Her 21st century. 21st century audience. And then we can bring in the postmodern or whatever where relevant. So the enduring struggle to relinquish for a 21st. Now we can say how she does that, right? Applying or imposing, or kind of inviting responders to reinterpret the, if you want to talk about Prospero and you want to get into that, you could do that, but yeah, we can do it there. You don't always want to bring in characters too soon. You want your ideas to go beyond the character, but it's fine to say something about the characters. Let me think about what you could say. I haven't seen the rest of your essay, so I'm trying to kind of speculate here. Enduring resonant struggle to relinquish control for a 21st century audience, inviting responders to reinterpret. I would go back to, the Jacobean values, right? A largely reinterpret a revenge quest. See, a revenge quest, we don't make it specific to a character. To reinterpret a revenge-based narrative as a psychological or psychoanalytical, as a more psychological and internalized. If you think about Felix in Hagseed, it's not he has revenge, but revenge is second. He wants to actually resurrect Miranda, so it's about him dealing with his grief and regret, and I think that's where we want to, forgiveness and all of that. So a revenge-based narrative is a more psychological and internalized battle with oneself. That's pretty nice. Okay, so look at that versus, reflecting the evolving values and concerns. Do you see the problem with evolving values and concerns? You haven't said any of the values or concerns. I hope that's coming off really clearly. And again, not meaning it to be a harsh criticism here. I'm just pointing everything out so it's super clear, so you can nail the next version. So in this vein, Margaret Atwood's prose fiction novel interprets the enduring/resonant struggle to relinquish control for her. She interprets the enduring struggle to relinquish control for a 21st century audience. Interprets the enduring. What happened to the Tempest? Oh yeah. So we're piecing things together here. Interprets the enduring resonant struggle to relinquish control represented in Shakespeare's late romance for a 21st century. A little bit clunky. I would work with the wording here. But what's the consequence? Remember, it's always like cause and effect. So what? Inviting responders to reinterpret a revenge-based narrative as a more psychological and internalized battle with oneself. Okay. Or as a more psychological and internalized battle for forgiveness. Yeah, for self-forgiveness. That's quite nice. Honestly, like there's no holding back on this. I'm trying to give you guys all the best stuff here. So I hope this is helping in terms of how we're going through it. Oh, Rosetta. Great to hear. Look, Rosetta's doing Tempest Tag Seed. So I hope the videos have been helpful. I hope this is helpful. This is showing you some real essay stuff here. I'm just taking a break from that, guys. 2 more sentences to go. You did your 45-minute mod B. Thank you for the videos on Artists of the Floating World. Thank you very much. Let me know, apple juice or awful juice, what you found most helpful with those, and we'll try to replicate in future content. All right, let's get back to it. Okay. So hopefully that's helping. Now we go to the next one. We were going to kind of cut that. And then through Prospero's role as an oppressor, this is where you get into the specific character journey. And, referring to characters is fine. Just make sure in an introduction, it doesn't sound like you're limiting your analysis to one character only, because you should be exploring the concepts through the experiences of many characters. Sometimes there is one dominant character, but there are many important characters, right? There's Miranda here, Caliban, and then the kind of collective of Calibans with the inmates. So there's kind of 3 key characters in this study, I would say, like 3 super key characters. So you want to be careful not to sound too limited by just having one character, but you can still have a general kind of summary sentence. I wouldn't have a whole sentence summarizing the plot, but something that at least ties in with the specific plot or the core plot element of the text. It is important to have that, so it doesn't sound too generic. Through Prospero's role as an oppressor, Shakespeare interrogates psychological and physical imprisonment endemic to colonial domination. All right, this is good. See, this is a huge step up. Hopefully you can all see this. This student sentence here, this is a huge step up from the previous sentences. There was like just vague, and now Prospero is an oppressor, psychological and physical imprisonment endemic to colonial domination. So specific, way more sophisticated. So this is much better. While Atwood, and I like this, you've got a comma and you say, through that, Shakespeare does that, while Atwood does this. You're engaging with the comparative element by splitting the sentence up there with while. So really good sentence here. While Atwood modernizes these ideas, it's kind of, these ideas, I just avoid saying ideas, themes, etc. as much as possible. If it's a really key word in the question, maybe you say ideas of or these ideas, but what about while Atwood reframes? Why not just get straight into that? If you're more to the point and get straight into it, it sounds more sophisticated. You're more concise and punchy and deliberate. And markers love it. A short, punchy statement really, kind of will do you favors in terms of how you go with the marks. Okay, they don't want drawn out sentences where it's hard to follow where you're going. While Atwood reframes colonization and incarceration, just be careful with these double ups. You get in, 1 or 2 double ups in an essay is not too bad, but you've got psychological and physical. Sometimes that's okay. I'd probably, you could get away with that one. But now it's starting to sound repetitive where you say A and B, colonization and incarceration. Try to just focus in on one thing. And if you want to say both of those key words, do it in a way where you're not saying and. Maybe one leads to another or something like that. A relationship, cause and effect, is always better than just doubling up, because I don't know which thing is more important to you. And it just sounds like, I don't know which thing is the main thing here now. I'm kind of confused. So less is more. So try to avoid double ups. As critiques of systemic oppression, thus by transforming, and just going back to what you said there. See, you've missed the Atwood context point here. See how you didn't quite link it? There you said colonial domination. You could have said like during the age of discovery. Just getting these like specific terms like this will get you a huge improvement in results. If you can say during the age of discovery, you're already doing better than 90% of students, because most students stop before saying the specific contextual reference. So in your intro, it's okay to refer to the big picture contextual influences like age of discovery, like postmodernism. With Atwood, you didn't actually say any specific contextual term. So where's your contextual link there? Okay, what do you want to link it to? Is it about the increase, the progressive attitudes and prison reforms in Canada? Like literally get specific with it, because the inspiration for each of these texts is critical. Context for module A. Thus, by transforming the Tempest legacy of control into a narrative of reclamation and self-empowerment. Okay, all right, I like this. Transforming as well, back to one of the key words there. The Tempest's legacy of control. This, you're kind of like sounding different in different sentences. Maybe you've drawn some inspiration from different things. This last sentence it's got a nice flow to it. It's a legacy of control into a narrative of reclamation and self-empowerment. Agseed expounds how text. Yeah, this sounds different. I don't know if I'm onto something there and you've taken inspiration from a different thing. It's fine if you have. It sounds different to your first couple of sentences by a long way. You'd be better off starting with this sentence. I mean, that would impress me if I was reading it. I'd be like, okay. Except for the last bit, like just to finish on a little downer there. Like that. This is a seriously impressive sentence. I know it might sound basic to people. By transforming the Tempest legacy of control, it flows so well, and you've captured so much in that. A legacy of control. I just like the word legacy there as well. It's kind of a unique way of saying it. I like that. It transforms into a narrative of reclamation and self-empowerment. You can get away with the double up there. Agseed expounds how textual conversations, everything sounding perfect, dynamically reflect societal paradigms. You kind of lost me there, just at the end. Societal paradigms. It's like generic term. Try to avoid that bit. The rest of this is honestly excellent. Like it's really good. I mean, I'm not factoring in the words of the question because I focused on that a lot in the first sentence with my feedback. You should try and get some more words in. You did get transforming, which is a keyword. If you could get interpret or reinterpret, I mean, that would be great. Value on the responder, if you could link it to value on the responder, and then just avoid the generic finish, like dynamically reflect something a bit beyond just a societal paradigm. I don't even know what you mean by that, right? Sounds vague, is vague. So have a think about that last bit. Parting green, really good. Great finish in terms of how we wrap this up. So I hope that helps. That is a really good example that we've gone through there. So for everyone watching, thank you for going through that. Got some more examples below, but I got to wrap this up now, unfortunately. Trying to chip away at all the responses. Do keep sending them in. There's a lot of responses that are too long. As we say on the thing, you can only send up to one paragraph. A shorter paragraph or a few sentences is more likely to get reviewed. So don't send anything longer than one paragraph. Don't jam two paragraphs into one. If it's longer than, say, like 150 words, we probably won't look at it because we've got to get through things in time and be fair to everyone. So use the links below the live streams on YouTube. Make sure you guys subscribe and check out JeddAI if you need to if you want some essays, full essays marked by our team of experts, real life markers, AI, teacher trained AI based on the rubrics that you're going to be assessed against. Go to Jeddle.com and go to JeddAI and get started on JeddAI. It's constantly improving, constantly giving more updated feedback on how you can improve your essays and creative pieces and the like. So check out JeddAI on Jeddle.com if you haven't already. That's where the magic happens. And Saxon, no worries if that was your piece. Again, I can't remember for sure, but thank you so much for submitting. If it was really, really high quality by the end there. So, props to you for getting it to that level. Just work on the start. Start strong, always. Do you have any reflections for imaginative writing tips? Do I have any reflections for imaginative writing tips? Okay, I assume you mean, do I have tips for the reflection statements that you're going to write based on an imaginative? Not do I have any reflections about imaginative writing tips. So yeah, my tips are focus on 2 stylistic elements for a reflection. When you're writing a reflection for the craft of writing or creating texts, whatever the module might be for you. If you're doing creating text or craft of writing, the reflection I would do is a mini essay. Mini essay means short introduction, 2 sentences is generally all you need. 2 paragraphs, 1 paragraph for 1 stylistic element. Like it might be, I used a first-person narrative voice. Maybe I used an unreliable first-person narrator. Maybe I used a nonlinear structure. Maybe I used a flashback. Maybe I used an anecdote. Maybe I used sensory imagery. Whatever it is, you need to have 1 stylistic feature in the first paragraph, and you need to link that to a specific purpose. The people who do the best with reflections are the ones who constantly say why they used it and what impact it had on the reader. A lot of people say, oh, this technique had this effect, but not a lot of people say, I wanted to invite my reader to question the reliability of my narrator, right? And use that personal language throughout the reflection, but keep talking about what you were trying to do for your reader of the imaginative. If everything is framed like that, here's the impact I wanted to have on the reader. Here's the impact my prescribed text had on the reader. You'll do really well because you're tackling purpose and audience more than most people will be doing. So that's it. Mini essay structure, 2-sentence intro, establish your purpose, what you were inspired, how you were inspired by a prescribed text through 2 stylistic elements, what you tried to achieve, and then 2 bodies, each body on 1 stylistic element with examples from both your piece and the prescribed text. Evaluate what you learned from the module in maybe the final sentence of each paragraph. Like, I found that, I was successful, or I was able to better understand the power of metaphors or of imagery to captivate my readers through a visual representation of X or Y idea. And then your conclusion can just be 1 sentence. A lot of people spend way too much time on the conclusion. 1 sentence, you should basically memorize a last conclusion sentence. And if you need to adapt it to a weird reflection question, you can. Why do I say weird? Because most reflection questions are pretty standard. So just memorize it, have it ready to go, and be able to pump it out in like 30 seconds if you're rushed for time at the end of your exam. That's some kind of high-level advice on reflections. That's it. Guys, I'll see you next week. 2 more weeks of school. Everyone's moving on to new modules. People are doing assessments. Keep submitting your work. Keep tuning in. Thank you so much. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and spread the word if you can. Always good to have some more people checking out the videos. Check out the website, Jeddle.com, for all of your English resources. If you want help writing the essays and you need all of the analysis, like the sophisticated expressions to actually analyze your texts, we've got all of the modules covered. So jump on to Jeddle.com for that. And JeddAI, again, is the marking tool for you. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Hope this helped, and see you next time.